Thomas Green here with the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. On the episode today, we have Dania Shawwa. Dania, welcome.
Hi, Thomas. How are you? It's so nice to be on your show.
It's nice to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
I am, first of all, it's a parenting podcast. I'm the mother of three children, two of whom are well past the teenage years and they're into adulthood, 22 and 20. And then the youngest one just turned 16. I am a professional mediator. I used to be in publishing, but when I lived in Hong Kong for a long time. And then we moved to Zürich, Switzerland. And when COVID hit, I decided to qualify as a mediator, and I took courses in the UK, the US, and in Germany. So I have learned a lot about conflict resolution, and I wish I knew a lot of these tips and tricks and perspectives when I was raising younger children. And I'm hoping that I can impart a few, new ideas on this show today to help people struggling with their young ones.
Well, I'm sure you can. And that leads me nicely onto the next question, which is, what is it that you wish you knew prior when you were raising your own?
I wish I knew what I was doing wrong in terms of pushing to solve their problems efficiently and quickly. And I wish I knew then that what I have in my mind isn't what they have in their minds. I always thought I was in my kids' heads and I knew what was going on in there, but usually that's not the case. And a lot of things can be avoided. A lot of escalation of conflict can be avoided if parents can just bear that in mind.
So would you say presuming you know what's going on, or perhaps attempting to know?
Yes, or assuming that you're right and that it's what they should be doing at that moment, or just in general. Children often feel like their parents don't get them. And that's when they start reaching out to their friends online, to Reddit, to ask questions, to sources that you really don't want them to reach out to. So if they feel heard and understood at home, which is the difficult thing for parents, because we're human beings. I mean, parents don't come with a kit, with a manual saying, this is what especially since, as you know, Thomas, you have three children. You never know what you're going to get. Each child is different. And that's the challenge. And not only is each child different, as they grow older, they become different children. And then they resent you for not realizing that they're not that child from 2 years ago. So it's a catch-22. You have to keep going with, you keep ahead of the curve of where they're headed. It could be that they were creative and musical 1 year, and then 2 years later, they're into sports and they're thinking about things differently, and you're still in that mode. And then they feel like my mom doesn't get me, my dad doesn't get me. It just breaks down a little bit because they expect you, they really want you. That's the funny things. Children, they want you to read their minds. They're not going to tell you what's on their mind.
So what's the solution to that then? Because it sounds like a tricky problem to navigate.
It is. I mean, one of the little themes that we discussed touching on today was teenagers and silent teenagers. How old are your kids, Thomas? Are they in the...
We're not a teenage. We're not the teenage years yet. I've got a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. But my co-host does have teens, so he'll most probably be listening to this, hoping you're going to give some gems.
Well, it's good to anticipate these things as they go. And I say girls enter teenage behavior at age 10, boys probably later. But for girls, especially in this day and age, they start getting these ideas very, very early on. And that's why for girls, especially, I say anticipate challenging perceptions and behavior at a much earlier stage than it was for our generation or my generation. I think I'm a bit older than you, Thomas. But silent kids, whether you're talking about an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, or a teenager, silent kids, it's not always a problem, but it's a sign that you have to do a bit more. And when they're shutting down, and I just want to speak about our time now, there is a mental health crisis with kids having to be disconnected from their friends and to be online. And it's not easy. And in fact, I want to say it's damaging, and no one is addressing that properly. And parents have to understand, you cannot expect, like right now, my sister couldn't go back to their home in Greece. She lives in Greece because her children have COVID. So she brought them to us here in Zürich. All three of them, including my 16-year-old, are now staring at a screen for 6 hours a day. They're each isolated. They're not talking, they're listening. A couple of them are actually following real life classes, but last year it was all online. No one is showing them interest. No one is asking them about who they are, no one is noticing them. They're invisible, they're anonymous. Sometimes they leave the camera off. Sometimes the teacher doesn't care if the camera is on, the video is on or off. I say parents have to make their children feel heard and understood, and that they're a real human being. And on top of that, the parent is not just a list of to-dos for the day. It's not just about, have you done your work? Have you taken out the trash? Have you tidied up your room? That's all we have time for usually, is just to make sure that they have the basics done. Parents have to show their children that they are on their side. What I mean is, if the child is suffering, if the child feels alone, if the child feels down, that there's enough space and time, and there's enough trust for that child to say it to their mom or to their dad. But it's not going to happen in the 5 minutes between putting away your books and setting the table for dinner. It's not going to happen then. It may not even happen at the weekend, where the family's going to the supermarket and then comes back and then watches a movie together, and that's quality time together. It's not going to happen like that. It has to be deliberate. So a mother or a father, especially if you're the parent of multiple children close in age, must be deliberate in creating time alone with each of the children. It doesn't have to be a long time. It could be 20 minutes where you try to just get that alone time, where you drive somewhere together. And in that time, try to convey the message: no matter what happens, no matter what you do, no matter where you mess up, I'm on your side. I'm not on anyone else's side. Not on your teacher's side, not on someone that you've mistreated side. I'm on your side, because at the end of the day, I want you to succeed, and I will show you what you can do to overcome whatever mistake you make and whatever hurdle you face. And then you have to be quiet. And when you have a silent child, the most important thing to do is to be quiet. Like literally be quiet, and make sure there's no one around. There's nothing happening. A drive is usually the best thing, because there's no eye contact. It's kind of like Freud's couch. They're sitting next to you. They're usually on their phone. After 10 minutes, they'll find it weird that you're not telling them something, like telling them to do something or remember something, or have you packed this or have you packed that. So what will happen is a gem will fall out of their mouth. Mommy, what do you think of if someone, does something, but they regret it, but the other person won't forgive them? That's usually like for a younger child. Or, Mom, I really think I'm not feeling great. That will come out of a 16-year-old's mouth after like 10 minutes of silence. They will come to the heart of what's on their mind, because you're giving them this silent thing, and at the end of the day, they have to fill it with something, and what's on their mind will come out. And that's when you make that connection of trust.
In relation to that particular scenario, I think most likely what the default position of a parent would be is to go into advice mode. What are your thoughts about
that? It's very tricky. Like, my husband and I love giving advice. And we have, and as parents, we've been through life, we have a lot of advice to give, because it's advice that's going to be cutting corners and going to be efficient, but it has to make sense to the child at the time. The tone of giving advice is the problem. The fact that you're giving advice is the problem. You have to be receiving from your child what it is that's bothering them. And to do that, you can't be giving advice, because you're blocking them. You're kind of and you might be assuming things. Giving advice is usually functional, like you've got to do this, you've got to do that, sit down, allocate an hour for this, and then you can play, or work hard, play hard, and these are things you can do to be efficient. Children are human beings that are growing, and emotional growth, especially during the pandemic, has been so challenging, and I would say backwards. I mean, I think children are retreating into themselves, and we better watch out. I see a lot of need for extra physical cuddling, a lot of physical reassurance. I see, children regressing a little bit into what they needed as a child in prior years, because they're missing out on the socialization. So giving advice that's functional is not going to address what's the real problem. Now, I say put everything aside and just be there in terms of love, just showing a lot of love, because they have time to get their life sorted when they're at the next stage, especially if there's a fresh start. Like if next year in September, let's say we're over this pandemic and we've had a good summer of everyone, just kind of resetting, they can become efficient. But right now, that's not the priority. Giving advice on emotional things, yes. On friendships, yes. But it has to be advice from the point of view of not what this is what you did wrong and this is how you could do it better. But I've been there. We've all done that. We all went through this. You're not the only one. You're not weird. You're not strange. And just giving them that atmosphere where they feel they enjoy talking to you because you really relate, even if you don't. Like, even if your child comes to you and says something quite challenging, especially when they're in their teen years. And for example, I grew up in a semi-conservative environment, and my children will come at me about being politically correct, about being inclusive, about not judging people, about being open to everything. Even if I don't want to be open to everything because it's just not the way I was brought up, I am forced to be open to these ideas. And you have to, because otherwise they won't talk to you anymore. And they will go online and they will find their community online. Speaking of their digital lives, once the children have their own laptops and phones and everything, for years and years, some parents might be like, children usually know the PIN codes of their parents' phones, but not the other way around. And why is that? It's because the children put up a fight and put up a wall. But actually, if you see them troubled, and if you see them, if you see your child struggling or extra silent or reclusing into their room, demand that they share the PIN code with you and take their phone for a day. They will kind of deny reality, but they will try not to imagine what you're doing, but you have to go through their digital lives a little bit, not to snoop and not to judge, but to see what they need and to see what they're going through and to try and understand what input they're getting. For example, their algorithms could all be about one thing that's a bit disturbing. That could be all be about, violent wrestling, or it could be about bikinis that then become something a little bit too much for them, but they don't know how to fix it, right? The thing is, they look things up, and then that becomes their digital life, and you don't know what they're looking at, and the algorithm keeps feeding them. Instagram keeps feeding them. Instagram for girls is extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous.
Why'd you say that?
Because even when it's about positivity, I think for girls and young girls, it's anti-health and anti-women. When it's selling these girls an ideal life of being healthy, and this is what a clean bowl of food looks like, and then you meditate, and then you have your room looking like this and your hair looking like these are. They may not tell them that everything has to be done at the same time, but that's the message that they're getting. Life has to look this perfect and this beautiful and this like beautifully lit, and it's all rubbish, and they're internalizing it. And so I told my university age girl is that if you do a yoga class, you're not supposed to have good hair. If you clean up your room, you don't have time to study. And what you're supposed to be doing as a university student is you're supposed to be hairy, smelly, and untidy, and studying for 5 hours, that's what you're supposed to do. But Instagram won't tell you that. It'll make you feel like a failure, even if you're a success. And then I said, at the weekend, you tidy up, you go to the gym, you have a drink with friends, you're fine. They don't get those messages. They get these messages of overloaded perfection. They get overstimulated, and it's just too much. It's too much for them, because on top of that, they're supposed to be studying for exams, placement exams, GCSEs, whatever it is. And on top of that, they're supposed to be having a social life, which they can't have. And on top of that, they're supposed to be like listening to parents' advice. And what planet is the parent coming from? The parent has never been a child. No one has told the child that the parent was ever their age. They just think of us as mummy and daddy, people to be avoided.
I think that you make a good point about you could make presumptions about online activity and not really know the truth of it, and I think that is a big deal. And I think you make a good point there. Regarding listening to your teen,
Yeah.
you've mentioned about the fact that you need to not jump into advice mode. Essentially, is there anything else that springs to mind for you there?
I think that there has to be a deep time for a deep discussion. So if you're short spurts of silence, like you're giving them time to open up a little bit, then there has to be a deeper discussion with them. But again, more to be on the silent side for you, and then to ask open questions that are not yes and no questions. Try. I always end up asking yes and no questions to my children, and they will literally jump with joy and say yes or no, and then that's it. And then I've lost the opportunity. Try to ask questions that are, what do you think would happen if your worst case scenario does take place? Why do you say that? What makes you think that? Who else do you think is suffering like this? Why, like just questions about stimulating their own thoughts to come out. So that's very important. I also want to say something else about silence with teenagers. It's not always a bad thing. I mean, I remember as a teenager, well, it's normal, first of all. I remember as a teenager, when I was 15, I would just go into my room and close the door. I would not want to interact with my parents. I love my parents and they were great. They just did not interest me. They were boring to me. This was pre-internet. I would just sit in the room and stare at myself in the mirror. I mean, that was a lot more fun to me than listening to anyone older. But I just want to say that a lot of times they're quiet and they're staring into their screens, but a lot of times they're actually doing something really interesting, or thinking about things, or doing wonderful things. They could be putting something together. They could be writing something. Maybe they won't reveal it. They could be they could be learning things about music or history or whatever it is. It could be a positive thing. The other thing is, for many years now, the older generation said, well, remember when we used to get bored, and we don't get bored anymore, and whatever. I mean, a silent teenager, as long as they don't look like they might be down, there's nothing wrong with them just chilling and not being overstimulated. And as long as they're not in a negative algorithm on their phones and being sucked into something that's not very healthy, there's nothing wrong with them chilling, really, as long as there's no problem with their work and you don't think that they're depressed or mildly down or anything like that. Overstimulation is just the worst. And expecting to be perfect at everything is just the worst. So
yeah, I think it's true for a lot of adults as well, not just teens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't set hours for phone usage. I mean, your kids are younger, yes, you have to set those hours, but when they're older, it's hard because everything is on there, like their meetings and their contacts and their alarm clocks and all of that. But I mean, definitely at meal times, it gets put away, and you stimulate conversation during meal times, or just silence at meal times is fine. I mean, everyone needs a bit of a break. But you can't have silence without really establishing the trust. I'm here for you. Whatever you tell me, I'm always going to be on your side, no matter how bad it is. And making them feel like everyone's gone through everything. Everyone in the family has done what you're about to do. You're gonna try everything. You're gonna make a lot of mistakes. It's fine. It's just, I'm here to help you work through what it is that you need to do. Life is not perfect, never.
I know you're a mediator, but do you help parents in any other sort of format?
Yeah, we are actually, mediation is a process of taking two people who are in conflict and then finding the common ground and getting them to reveal to each other things that the other side may not have realized. And by the end of it, usually there's an opportunity to create some kind of an agreement that they sign at the end. And it's a process that's led by a neutral mediator, and it does work for families. So this process can work for a parent and an older child, I would say. It can work also between parents. It can work between siblings. So if there's two siblings squabbling, whether they're young and it's about just, the usual things, or in cases of divorce, in cases of separation, in cases of even for older families, for estate and wills. It's a simple process where the mediator is just guiding them through a very, very, very deliberate series of steps. And by the end of it, usually they come up with their own solutions and they're quite satisfied. Usually it's a very satisfying process and it only takes a few hours. And I really went into mediation because I'm a person who cannot tolerate unresolved issues and conflict, because I really feel it eats away at health. I mean, it can lead to disease, it can lead to sadness, it can lead to people not speaking to each other for years, but wanting to on the inside, but not knowing how. It can waste a lot of time, and I think it can affect generations as well. So like going through a mediation process for a few hours can release a lot of issues that the other person may not have realized at all. And it's just a very careful, respectful, positive process. And the mediator does not advise, the mediator does not judge, the mediator just watches out and asks a lot of questions to make sure everyone has their most important issues out in the open, and then with a lot of respect to deal with each one of these topics. And by the end of it, usually they've understood each other much better, and they know where the common ground is, and they know where their common interests are.
And there's actually, before we spoke, I actually had a look online, and there's actually a mediation example of one that you did on YouTube. Would you say it's a good example to look at?
Yeah, that was between a young athlete and the club where she practiced tennis, and then unfortunately the director of the club smashed her in the face with a tennis ball. And ever since then, this young person's career, her athletic aspirations went downhill. And the resentment, yeah, it is a very, very good example, because that person's aspirations have been suspended, but she doesn't have the maturity and she doesn't have the language with which to go to the other side and say, this is what I feel you've done to me. So instead of doing that, she's asking for a large sum of money and she's threatening to litigate. And that's a very common thing, which is people threaten to litigate. They threaten to go to court. If you go to court, that's great, that's an option, but does it really solve the real problem? Does money solve the real problem? What you've done when you go to a lawyer, and especially in cases of separation and divorce, the first thing they tell you is don't talk to the other side. So they've created that distance. The second thing is the lawyer's aim is for you to win and for the other person to lose. Is that a good thing when children are involved? Never. I say never. It's never a good thing. It creates more suspicion, more it's opaque. You don't know what the other side is thinking, and you don't know how much of it is their lawyer, how much it creates a lot of hurt, and all of that can linger. So even if you win, you've damaged the relationship. And why is that a good thing? I mean, you can win £1 million. If your relationship with the other side is damaged, and that other side has been a good part of your life, a positive part of your life in the past, and now it's like something you can't even hear their name, you just get these emotions, it's affecting your health, it's affecting your trust in people and your happiness. And the other side is even worse, in a worse situation. So courts take time, they take money. What other avenues are there for people to solve their personal problems? You can go
Certainly
to
a
friends.
more healthy way, isn't it, of doing it?
Yeah, you can go to friends and family, but they're usually biased and they will give advice. Like you say, people giving advice, it's easy to give advice. It's just easy, but it's not the right way.
So if someone is does have some parenting conflicts, where is the best place for people to find you?
My website is www.new-leaf-mediation.com. New Leaf Mediation is my company name, and they can just reach out through the website or look me up.
Have you got any closing thoughts at all?
I just want to tell everyone just to show their children lots and lots of love, to show them a lot of tolerance and understanding, and not to assume anything.
Dania, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.